All right, welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 134, recording on Wednesday, December 10th. Appreciate you guys being here. Q&A episode for you guys today. We'll get into a ton of your questions over the course of this episode, but we're going to start with a little bit of a starting five. It's what I'm going to call it. If you know me, you know I love basketball. It's an easy way for me to disperse five thoughts that I've got over the course of this week, both from the game and the win against the Commanders and kind of looking forward and ahead to this weekend's Cowboys game and beyond. So we'll start there. But first, if you're new here and watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. There's a little red box in the corner. It helps us out a ton, and we would really, really appreciate that. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart, you can rate and review and follow us over there, and that stuff helps us out as well. This show is presented by First Resource Bank. If you don't know about it, they are a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. They've got branches all over the place, and it's run by really good people in Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, and Charlie Anderson. They love the Vikings. They care about this community. They built a really, really easy to use online banking platform. So the link to First Resource Bank is in the description. I have really enjoyed getting to know all of the folks over there since I moved to Minneapolis in the fall of 2022. All right, starting five. Here we go. First thought is going to be about the Vikings offensive plan on Sunday against the Commanders. There have been a lot of questions about it. You guys have asked questions about it. Kevin O'Connell's talked a lot about it. Wes Phillips, the offensive coordinator, talked a lot about it. So just going to lay it out here after watching the film, after looking at the numbers, and after talking to people. The first part of the starting five will be about the Vikings offensive plan. So here we go. On early downs, first down, second down, the Vikings went heavy. What do you mean, Alec? What is heavy? Multiple tight ends, multiple running backs, including a fullback and C.J. Ham. And the Vikings' approach on those early downs was essentially, we are just going to mash the Commanders' front vertically and run the football at them on early downs to put ourselves in, advantageous situations on third down to help J.J. McCarthy. That was really the early down plan. Sprinkled in within it, there were some play actions on early downs, but a lot of those kind of came towards the second quarter and probably the back half of the game. On third down, the Vikings went shotgun, empty, clearing it out, making the picture pretty obvious for J.J. McCarthy of what he's looking at, where the defense is aligning, and it was like a spread college-y look. So you were living in two different worlds, in two different situations, and it was a very sensible approach against the Commanders' defense that is pretty stagnant. Their front does not create a lot of pressure, and their back end, you can tell by the way that Dan Quinn and that coaching staff calls it, they don't have a lot of faith in that back end to disguise, to be multiple, to press receivers. Like, it is a pretty vanilla defense, and so that was one way to just be able to target the opposing team and the Washington Commanders pretty clearly on late down. So, again, you're living in two drastic worlds. Early downs, heavy run game, multiple tight ends, multiple running backs, including C.J. Ham. On third down, shotgun, spread it out, make the picture as clear as possible, and attack from there. A lot of the passing game was quick reads. What do I mean by that? It is an out route to T.J. Hawkinson in the flat, and you just put the ball on him and let him scoot up the left sideline for 10 yards. It's a two-person concept on the left side where you're saying yes or no to Justin Jefferson, and then you're throwing it behind that player to Jordan Addison on kind of a corner route. Like, that's what a lot of the game was. There were screens mixed in. There were, speed outs to Jalen Naylor on the sideline where he presses vertically and just peels it off against kind of an off coverage, cover three look. So a lot of quick reads. There was not a ton of asking J.J. McCarthy to read the entirety of the field and go 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 all the way across, which also makes it easier on the offensive line where they don't have to block for 3+ seconds. even against the Commanders front that is not exceptional. It also, there was a lot made last week, and Kevin O'Connell even referenced the simplification of the offense. It was something Wes Phillips talked about, Aaron Jones talked about it, Justin Jefferson was asked about it. The simplification, if there was really any, a lot of those, and I'm going to segue to my next point of the starting five, but a lot of, if there was a big change, it might have been at the line of scrimmage before the snap. It did not feel as if there was as much commotion, communication, delineation of we're changing the play here, we're doing this. There were some, you can see if you go back and watch the film, J.J. McCarthy is putting his hands on his helmet, which typically means he's canning a play from one to another or confirming a play from a play to a play. And so, but if there was any meaningful shift for me rewatching the TV copy and the film, it's likely that the pre-snap operation and mayhem, that's probably where the lessening or the simplification happened, is what I'd say. So that's kind of the first part of the starting five. Just want to lay out what the Vikings' plan was and looked like in the game on Sunday against the Washington Commanders, because you guys asked a lot about it. All right, second point of the starting five. The passing concepts that I just referenced, the speed outs, the quick outs, the screens, the quick game over the middle, the first play of the game to Ben Sims, not a crazy shift from what the Vikings had put together for J.J. McCarthy in previous weeks, from the Bears game to the Packers game. A lot of the quick game has been there. The screens, they've been there. The high-low reads on the sideline where J.J. McCarthy is hitting Jordan Addison for a 21-yard out route, not something crazy new that the Vikings just all of a sudden cooked up in the offices 2 floors above me last week, and they're like, you know what, let's put these concepts in. No, a lot of that stuff has been in there. The difference, more than anything else, to me, was just J.J. McCarthy's accuracy on those throws and against those concepts. Now, this could segue into a conversation. Was his accuracy improved because he wasn't thinking as much mechanically? Definitely a possibility. Was his accuracy improved because it's just more time playing the game? Definitely a possibility. Was his accuracy improved because it's just, the defense was so stagnant that there was not much pressure being applied to him to ratchet him up mentally? Definitely a possibility. But, this plan, from a passing concept perspective, in the game on Sunday against the Commanders, and this is just, my opinion, obviously it's informed, I didn't feel like it was drastically different from the types of plans from a passing concept perspective that the Vikings have tried to put together for J.J. McCarthy in previous weeks. So, well, yes, there was a lot made about the simplification. For me, more than anything else, J.J. McCarthy was accurate with the football. Did I think his footwork was perfect? No. Did I think he was totally calm in the pocket? No. There was a red zone play, believe it might have been in the third quarter, where it's an incompletion to Jordan Addison on a little slant route, and J.J. McCarthy is bouncing around and kind of off balance in the pocket in a way that you'd prefer him not to be as consistent as possible, and it just didn't bite him in that particular play. There were still some very violent pocket movements that will probably lead you to be inaccurate if you're throwing more down the field. But to be very clear, the Vikings are not asking him to throw deep downfield over the middle the way they've asked Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold in the past. And that was not just a shift that happened this past Sunday against the Commanders. That's been something that that's been part of the design now for many weeks. So that's just the second part of the starting five. Don't think the passing concept and design was crazy drastically different from what we've seen. The third point that I want to make is you cannot overstate the importance of the Vikings being able to play with the lead in that game. So in the first 13 weeks of the season, I thought this was crazy. The Vikings only had 128 offensive snaps with the lead in the football game. That is a crazy low number. It was bottom 5, I believe, in the NFL, and it's not surprising. It feels like for much of the season, way different than last year, the Vikings are trailing early in these games, and so it forces everything to be different. The defense can't get as aggressive. The offense has to be more of a drop back pass type of operation. It just affects everything. In week 14, again, 128 snaps playing with the lead in the first 13 weeks offensively. In week 14, they had 54 snaps playing with the lead. That is drastically different. And for me, it's partially why the Commanders couldn't stick with the run game that was pretty successful in the game. It was why the turnovers were likely to come, because the opposing quarterbacks had to force the ball down the field. It allowed the Vikings to stick to the run game. It prevented J.J. McCarthy from having to drop back. This, I thought, was a crazy statistic that I pulled up. The 3 games this season where the Vikings have played the most offensive snaps with the lead are the Commanders game. They won that game handily. The Bengals game. They won that game handily. And the Lions game in Detroit, which the Vikings obviously won. That feels, this formula feels to me so conducive and so paramount to this team winning this year. So honestly, the rest of the way in these final 4 games, if I were you guys and I'm watching from home and I've got a beer in my hand, or chips and dip on the table, or wings, or whatever suits you, Jersey Mike's, which still hasn't sponsored the podcast, and no, I'm not heard about it. Wink, wink. But if I was watching these games down the stretch, I would pay very, very, you're always paying attention to the score, but the score dictates the script of the game. And so Sunday night against the Cowboys, does Dallas have an early lead? And how big is that lead? Because that will predicate play calling on both sides. Against the Lions, same deal. Against the Giants, same deal. Against the Packers to end the season, same exact deal. The point of the starting 5, number 3, that I wanted to make is you cannot overstate the importance of this team playing with the lead. So there you go. Number 4 is just going to be a shout out to 3 players that I want to shout out from the game and really throughout a lot of this season. The first one is Eric Wilson, who has just been an absolute revelation at age 31. This does not really happen. I asked Brian Flores on Tuesday, is there an arc of a player in your background that kind of comes to mind when you think about a player becoming a certain starting type of caliber player this late in a career and having such a high impact on games? And Brian Flores sat there at the podium, or the lectern, whatever you call those things, for a second, and then 2 seconds, and then 5 seconds, and then 10 seconds. He's like, you know what? Really, the only player that comes to mind is Zach Bond. And for those of you who know, Zach Bond was a defensive lineman for the Saints, who the Eagles signed, and Vic Fangio really was sought after by Vic Fangio. Funny enough, he was also really sought after by Brian Flores in this defense. But the Eagles ended up paying Zach Bond, and Zach Bond has transitioned and become one of the best linebackers in the NFL. He's younger than Eric Wilson, which made Brian Flores say, this is kind of a one-of-one type deal. This guy, Eric Wilson, is everywhere. He has applied pressure up the interior at a clip that transcends any other linebacker really in the NFL. He tracks down the ball carrier in space with elite closing speed. Brian Flores said on Tuesday that he's told many production meetings, meaning the commentators of the game each weekend, they have this meeting before the games with the production crew where they get into some of the nitty gritty. And Brian Flores said he's told a lot of those groups and commentators and analysts, he wishes he had Eric Wilson 5 years ago, because there's no telling what type of player and production and salary that Eric Wilson would have generated had they been together. So just an incredible season from Eric Wilson. Cannot tip my cap enough to what he's done. It's just been an incredible signing. The second player I wanted to shout out as part of this is C.J. Ham. There was a third down on early in the 98-yard drive where C.J. Ham, the Commanders get real creative with the pressure, which they didn't do much in the game, and they bring a defensive back off the edge. And at the last second, C.J. Ham sees it. I tweeted this snap, and so if you're looking for it, you can follow on social media at Alec_Lewis, where I put some of the All-22 tape on there after the games. But C.J. Ham sees this blitzer. He gets hands on him, and it allows J.J. McCarthy to scramble on the 3rd and 6 for a first down, which sets up the 98-yard touchdown drive. I also felt like C.J. Ham really brought the thunder in the run game. Yeah, he brought the thunder. That's something that a coach would say. It doesn't really feel comfortable rolling off my tongue, but you try. Like, you got to, it's what you got to do. Thought C.J. Ham was exceptional, again, in the run blocking phase, and then is usually reliable in pass protection. So it's never really going to get the most, praise, attention, but definitely felt like he played a role on early downs, and then I mentioned the late down where he was huge. And then the third player I want to mention is a guy I've talked a lot about all year, Jalen Nailor. Just felt like whether it was the little flip on the motion early on the first drive where he scampers up the left sideline for 9 yards, or whether it was the speed out that I mentioned where he presses vertical and makes the opposing defense really guard him vertically and then peels it off toward the sideline. Like, Jalen Nailor has been so reliable. He doesn't have a drop this season. Looked that up before this podcast, which is pretty crazy to me. So just highly, highly impressed with the consistency really on a week-to-week basis. In what is a contract year, shout out to Terez Paylor, the late Terez Paylor, the great Terez Paylor, who used to say that contract years are undefeated. He is absolutely correct. And then the fifth part of the starting five, before we get to you guys' questions, just if you haven't seen it, please go look for Harrison Smith's comments post-game and just the emotion that he showed. It was in kind of after some questioning from Chip Scoggins, the great Star Tribune columnist, and Harrison was just talking about how kind of the pregame messaging was play for the 16-year-old version of yourself, and how that hit how that hit home for him. Harrison Smith, just a consummate pro. This dude has given everything to this organization, and for him to, have the interception in a game like that in what has been a really taxing season for him, whether you're talking about the personal health matter that he had to work through early in the season, or whether you're talking about just the team not winning at the clip that he hoped for when he signed to play another season. Like, to see that emotion should be celebrated. His career should be celebrated over the course of his last 4 games, regardless of what might be his future. Just wouldn't take for granted the opportunity to watch him do what he does. I try not to on a week in, week out basis. So Harrison Smith, if you haven't seen that, go look for his comments after the game, the emotion that he showed. All right, we're going to get to your questions here right quick. But before, wanted to, have a little word for a company that has been so supportive of the Alec Lewis Show all season. All right, that company is Unreal. It is a locally owned and operated clothing company that has gone national, frankly, and I'm obviously wearing it here. You see me wearing it now on every podcast. You see me wearing it all over the place, everywhere, all the time. Our marketing director is now making fun of me for how often that I'm wearing it on a daily basis, but it looks good, in my opinion, and that's all that matters. And it's comfortable, which really is what matters. So Unreal, the clothing brand, they've got these limited edition hoodies, and I want to pull this out if you're watching on YouTube. This one is a winter whiteout elevation hoodie. It's just exceptional. It would look phenomenal wearing it Christmas Day for the Vikings-Lions game. But Unreal does these limited edition hoodies pretty much on a weekly basis. And you can find those in the description below. You can also follow them at Unreal Co. pretty much everywhere. But just a great hoodie. Looks cool, is comfortable. It's part of their elevation kind of product line. So highly, highly recommend that. Again, the information to their limited edition drops are in the description below. And I want you guys to go check them out. They will have more before the season ends, and you're going to want to get them because you got to need something to wear in this in the snowstorm that is. All right, first question comes from Chase Allen. Chase, who is always trusted as a listener, asks, can you go through how much better the run game was this week? What was the main catalyst for the improvement? Was the opponent, the scheme, getting the line healthy? And that is the full entirety of the question. So I'll say this, Chase. It's a great question because the Vikings' success rate in the run game on Sunday was 55.2%. That is the highest rushing success rate that the Vikings have had in a game this season. It was obviously a run game that looked good. It looked fluid. It was efficient. It was easy to watch. The reasons for it, you hit a lot of them, but it all matters with the run game. Like, not to go on a crazy tangent, but analyzing the run game numerically is often kind of difficult because you're segmenting the offensive line production, the defense and their skill set, the running back and the running back's ability to make guys miss. So run game numerically is really hard to evaluate. That's why the film's so important. The 5 offensive line being healthy is critical. Before Sunday, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill, Ryan Kelly, Donovan Jackson, Christian Darrisaw had only played 35 snaps together this season. That's crazy. And had I told you that prior to the season, had I said, guys, until week 14, you're only going to see that group together for 35 snaps, you would probably have said, oh boy, what is it going to look like? Who are the backups? How does that work? How much harder does that make it for J.J. McCarthy? So, it is a real meaningful, important data point of this season. But this 5 offensive line, 5 guys working together, played a critical role in the run game, moving guys vertically. Ryan Kelly had a really good game on film, in my opinion. So did Brian O'Neill. And then again, you can't not mention the personnel usage of 3 tight ends, of C.J. Ham. That stuff mattered in terms of the success of the run game. The Commanders' front and it being weak is definitely something to mention. Deron Payne, their interior defender, is the best guy they've got on that front, and it's just not an exceptional group. Also thought the backs ran really good, and I put on social media that Jordan Mason, for my money this year as a pure runner, has been exceptional. His vision is crazy to watch. The fumbles have definitely been an issue. The pass protection is a major issue and probably the primary reason that the 49ers were willing to move him this past offseason, but thought the running backs ran well too. So the combination of all of that is what it takes to be a really good run game. In my opinion, the scheme wasn't crazy, unique, creative. It doesn't remotely compare to what you're seeing in certain, situations right now. If you were to go watch the Miami run game, it kind of looks like a different sport than what the Vikings are right now. But a lot of that is because, they probably trust that group. They spend the time on that group. Their offensive line has guys like Aaron Brewer who can pull. So all of that stuff matters in the assessment of the run game. The next question comes from Sean Marthis. Sean asks, what will it take to get Justin Jefferson the ball? At this point, JJ seems reluctant to throw anything past the line of scrimmage to him, which obviously isn't sustainable. So this was a question and a conversation that a lot of people wanted to have of, Justin Jefferson has had 2 catches in the past 2 weeks. Past 2 weeks, he's had 2 catches in each game. Last week, 2 catches for 11 yards. The week prior, 2 catches for 4 yards. No, that is not sustainable. That is not good. As much gravity as he creates for others, you just can't really have a guy like him struggle as much as you can't have the offense struggle as much as it has to get him the ball. Part of the Justin Jefferson thing for me is the Vikings aren't really throwing a ton over the middle of the field right now. I'll say this, I looked this up. So from 2022 to 2024, the Vikings had 836 attempts between the numbers. That was 6th in the NFL over that span. This season, in 2025, they've had 156 attempts between the numbers. That's 28th in the NFL this season. J.J. McCarthy's only thrown it between the numbers 61 of his 182 pass attempts this season. So you guys might be wondering, why does that affect Justin Jefferson? Well, there's only so much space on the field. And if you're not using that area with inbreakers the way that they have, it affects maybe Justin Jefferson's greatest skill set, which is his deception and his route tree down the field. If defenses and cornerbacks and the secondary can weed out a little bit of the possibilities of where Justin Jefferson might go, it makes it easier to cover him. The other aspect of it is he's just definitely getting a lot of double coverage and a lot of attention from multiple bodies on the field. And so to beat those types of coverages, it often requires more of your designer style passing game, which is to say, like, more, the types of routes and concepts that you probably have to implement within a season that you don't work on all throughout the summer and train it, like just not your base concepts. And what we've learned, really, I think what we learned Sunday, and JJ McCarthy said after the game that a lot of the Sunday concepts were some of the base stuff that the Vikings implemented throughout the spring and summer. Now, what was interesting, it was in the third quarter with the minute 18 left in that game, the Vikings went with like a 3-by-1 formation with a little 3-receiver bunch on the right side. They short motion Jordan Addison to try to occupy the safety, and they get him. They occupy the safety, and so Justin Jefferson is running scotch-free vertical down the right sideline. J.J. McCarthy didn't launch the pass. It could have been, had he thrown it, had it been a completion, probably would have been like a 60-some-odd yard touchdown in years past. But J.J. McCarthy didn't throw it. Thought that was interesting. It was interesting after the game. Justin Jefferson was asked about it, and he kind of said they drew it up on the sideline. So for me, it's kind of an example of when you're trying to incorporate some more designer stuff to get Justin Jefferson the ball against the coverage looks that he sees, it feels like that is harder for J.J. McCarthy to accomplish than more of the base, whether it's 4 verticals, whether it's a high-low concept, more of the base type stuff. So I think all of that is a part of why it's been so difficult to get Justin Jefferson the ball in space. Like, I'd obviously still love to see a jet sweep to Justin or other aspect, slants in some capacity. But even like the slant route, what does that require? Accuracy on the body, on the break, with touch that's not sailed, or else that leads to, slants can lead to tips and overthrows, which can lead to turnovers, which has been really the primary focus that the Vikings have wanted to weed out of their passing game. So all of that, again, not targeting the middle of the field as much, and then a reluctance a little bit, or an inability a little bit to make some of these designer passing game concepts, for me, is why it's been so much of a struggle. And I'm not sure how much of that stuff will be able to get ironed out over the last 4 games. We'll see. Like, if they try to implement more and J.J. McCarthy is acclimating to game speed and being more accurate consistently, maybe it's possible to tap into that stuff, and maybe it's possible for Kevin O'Connell to then trust that J.J. McCarthy can throw it over the middle in certain capacities. So we shall see. Next question comes from Eric Hansen, who asks, I think the wide receiver picture beyond Justin Jefferson still needs to be figured out. Do you feel it could be a big question mark moving forward, and how do you see it playing out? So it's a great question, Eric, because I'm actually writing about this at The Athletic for Thursday. You can stay tuned for that, theathletic.com, where I will be hitting the Jordan Addison, Jalen Nailor conversation a little bit in more depth. But Jordan Addison will be extension eligible this offseason. This year, he's had 37 catches for 510 yards for 3 touchdowns. He has also had 6 drops, the most of his career, which is kind of a jarring number. He was suspended the first 3 games. That obviously affects his production. He was also held out for a coach's decision in the first quarter of the Cleveland game in London. Don't feel like he's been anywhere close to as consistent as you would want, as maybe he's been in past years. The off-the-field stuff is definitely a part of the calculus. The drops, again, are jarring. Some of those may be somewhat of a byproduct of the lack of rhythm and timing in the passing game, but there have just been too many passes where, as a viewer, you guys, me in the press box, and guarantee you the Viking staff, it's just like you got to catch some of those passes if you're our first-round pick who we're potentially ponying up big money. I've already talked about Jalen Nailor in this podcast. I feel like he's been so reliable. Part of the reason that the Vikings did the trade for Adam Thielen was the questions early coming out of training camp of Jalen Nailor's health. He had a hand injury at the time, and really the recovery timeline for him was incredible, and his consistency all year is a bit above and beyond. It's part of the reason Adam Thielen just didn't play a ton here. Jalen Nailor knows all the positions. He has the speed to threaten defenses vertically. He doesn't have a drop this year, which I already mentioned in this podcast, which is impressive. So again, I'm going to write about this situation in depth and give kind of my verdict on what I would do if it were me in this story. So a little bit of a teaser there. The other aspect I would say, I mean, the Vikings took Ty Felton late in the third round this past year in the draft. If you followed the coverage, you knew at the time that Ty Felton was probably rarely, unless there was some serious injury situations, the Vikings wanted this to be a developmental year for Ty Felton. Learn all the positions in the offense, develop from a route running perspective and kind of a fluidity perspective, understand defenses, and then contribute on special teams. Like, that's the year they wanted Ty Felton to have. Now, you could quibble with, why would you take that player late in the third round when you don't have a defensive starter drafted since 2021 unless you want to include Jay Ward? Like, that's a quibble that I totally understand. I totally get, especially with the cornerback room and the safety room and et cetera being where they're at. Like, that is a conversation that is very valid. But Ty Felton, like, you know, we'll see what he looks like in future years. Obviously, still a non-factor from a receiving perspective right now. To kind of end the conversation on this subject, Eric, Jamison Williams, who was drafted a year earlier than Jordan Addison, became extension eligible and then signed a contract that's around $27 million a year in average annual value. That's a lot of money, frankly. Jordan Addison, like, I'm not sure, even with the cap probably going up, like, I'm not sure if $27 million would be, like, that feels like a bit much for Jordan Addison. Maybe it's $23 million, maybe it's $25 million. It's still a lot of money. Jalen Naylor might be in the ballpark of $12 million a year, $14 million a year. So you'd probably be saving like $10 million in cap space that you could allocate elsewhere. And I mean, again, that's the folks 2 floors above make they make more money to make these decisions, but I have opinions on probably what I would do. So that's what I'd say. The next question comes from a Twitter user whose name is @thiscrapsucks, which is, I don't know what they're talking about, but I feel for them. What's the highest priorities in the offseason and in the first round of the draft? So it's a good question and something we will talk a lot about in the weeks and months to come. But I'd say positionally, the priorities have to be cornerback, safety, defensive line, tight end, running back, and then potentially tackle. I mean, why I say tackle is obviously Christian Darrisaw has had the injury situation that he's had this year. Brian O'Neill has had a great year, I've thought, just like he usually does when he's healthy. But he is entering a season where his contract gets a little bit interesting and might have to be reworked in some way. He's also above 30 years old. So, I mean, I know the team loves him, teammates love him, coaching staff loves him. But I guess the question would be, what are you allocating to a guy at that age? What are you okay with? And do you need depth kind of behind them? So as it relates to the draft with these positions, I mean, the fortunate thing for the Vikings is there's a lot of guys at a lot of these spots who are likely day one starters. And that's, I mean, Caleb Downs, the safety from Ohio State, Jeremiah Love, the running back from Notre Dame, Mansour Delane, the cornerback from LSU, Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon, Peter Wood Jr., the defensive tackle from Clemson, Jermon McCoy, the corner from Tennessee. I could go on with a list and names and stuff like that, but like that's really where I'm at. And the argument, we'll probably have it over the course of the next few months, specifically of what's more necessary, corner or safety or defensive line or tight end or running back. So all of that stuff is worth asking about. It's worth talking about, and there will be a lot of it in the future here. Phil Kujawa asked a question that I've gotten a lot. Do you think KOC will ever hand over play calling to an offensive coordinator or just be a head coach? Like, what I'd say here is it's really, 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 really hard to imagine me, Kevin O'Connell, giving up play calling when they've had a quarterback capable of handling the extent of the offense that they've preferred. They've moved the football. Do I feel like the run game and mixing that in more is a necessity, has been kind of a priority and something that's need to improve. Yes. Do I think a guy can be more willing to hinge their plan, their calls, their performance on that over time? Yes, I do. And then it just feels like Kevin O'Connell, so much of kind of what he gets out of this job beyond the leadership aspect and all that is the ability to identify coverage, decipher it, attack it on Sundays. So, yeah, just really, really hard to imagine that one. Next question comes from Steve. Steve asked a question about the cap for next offseason. Looking for it right here. How are the Vikings going to get under the cap next season? What does Jalen Redmond's contract look like next season? So, like, this is some back of the napkin math that is mostly derived from overthecap.com, which is a great tool to play around with. But the Vikings are essentially $35 million over the cap for 2026, and there are a lot of avenues for them to use or for them to take to be able to get themselves back in the black from a cap perspective. This is just an example, okay? So let's say the Vikings are like, look, we want to cut some aging veterans who cost a lot of money. And they decide, we'll cut TJ Hockenson, we'll cut Ryan Kelly, we'll cut Javon Hargrave, we'll cut Aaron Jones. That would create around $42 million in cap space for 2026 and put you directly in the black. So, like, that's one option. There's another path where you could restructure money of young players who are key contributors for your team to where your restructure means push back money into the future, which is more palatable when you're doing it with players who you don't expect to fall off a cliff. So the Justin Jeffersons of the world, I mean, look, these names don't sound as good as probably they did prior to the season, but Andrew Van Ginkel, Christian Darrisaw, Byron Murphy, like, you could push back a lot of money from those guys to create more cap space. So there's a lot of answers in that regard. It's not the most probably easy or seamless, and doing that, making those types of moves would certainly leave holes at certain spots. And how are you filling all those holes? It's a valid question, but just wanted to lay out kind of the roadmap of some areas or some levers that you could pull to start to create some of that stuff. As for Jalen Redmond, it is my understanding he's an exclusive rights free agent. What that would allow the Vikings is to offer him a 1-year deal on a minimum contract. It almost feels too good to be true considering the impact that he's made this year. But, I mean, with where they are in the cap, that's probably an option. Could they extend him into the future? Yes. He's obviously navigated a bunch of stuff health-wise that might affect the calculus of that. So we'll see with Jalen Redmond, but being an exclusive rights free agent, I do think that 1-year minimum deal is an option, as wild as it kind of seems. The next question comes from Nick Miller. This one I didn't really prepare for, but I do want to answer it. What's more likely over time? JJ learns to operate the KOC preferred offense, or KOC adapts his scheme to better fit JJ's skill set? Well, I mean, the first thing I would say, and we talked about it a lot at the top of this podcast, to think that the Vikings haven't adapted their scheme until now or at all is just faulty. Like, you look at a lot of advanced metrics, and I'm going to save a lot of these because there's a lot of stories to be written, but the amount that the Vikings are targeting in-breakers over the middle of the field is way down from Kevin O'Connell's history here. The amount they're targeting the middle of the field, the amount of out routes they're throwing compared to years past, the screen usage this year as opposed to past years. Like, I do, part of Kevin O'Connell adapting to JJ's skill set, like, you can see within the game plans on film that they've tried bootlegs, screens, in certain spots you'd hope that the run game would have been better, but that stuff has obviously been affected by the offensive line. It's difficult to kind of parse because not having confidence in J.J. McCarthy to throw over the middle of the field really limits what's possible. And even some of the other stuff, like the classic high-low toward the sideline, J.J. McCarthy until Sunday hadn't really been accurate enough for even that type of plan to work. So, like, I think first and foremost, to see JJ McCarthy be accurate for the most part on Sunday is the most important thing, the best progression possible. And then you hope that over time, his ability to acclimate to game speed allows you to then push the ball over the middle and get back to kind of where a lot of chunks come from um, among all offenses in the NFL. So I would say, to answer the question a little bit, I do think they've adapted. Um, I would say the roster construction in many ways like limits the overall adaptation because frankly when you employ Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawks, I mean those are pass first guys, and so to go heavy personnel in many instances you're taking off players that you've kind of built your identity around. So like it might be easier in future years to reshape some of the identity if um if it might be easier if you can allocate resources on different types of body types and players and that type of thing. So again, it'll be interesting over the last 4 games to see if JJ McCarthy continues to be accurate. Will the Vikings be more willing to try to push the ball to areas of the field that they haven't really been willing to in a lot of weeks? And can JJ McCarthy do that effectively? And then can you blend it? But like, if I'd asked you before Sunday, what is JJ McCarthy throwing well right now? The underneath throws, he was throwing hot. The deep downfield throws, he was kind of sailing. The out routes, he was missing. So if you're a designer, like what are you trying to design? It kind of becomes a difficult challenge. And the last question comes from Quasey's Burner at Eric Vikes Fan 28. It's a weird name, kind of makes me feel weird saying that, but whatever. Do you see Brian Flores back as the DC for the Vikings in 2026? So, like, I'll just say this. Throwing the idea that Brian Flores isn't back in 2026 into the cauldron of questions that already exist this offseason kind of broke my brain. Obviously, the quarterback questions, obviously, the cap situation, the Jordan Addison extension conversation. Like, there are so many important questions to ask. It is my understanding that there were some coaches on the staff who have kind of entered the final year of their deal. So how many of those guys get re-upped? Who is getting re-upped? Who's leaving? What spots need to be filled? And then Brian Flores, like, you can't overstate the impact he's had since he arrived in 2023. I think in EPA since 2023, the Vikings are fourth in creating EPA defensively. This year alone, they're ninth in DVOA, and that is with playing a ton from behind. So, I mean, again, just the idea of needing of needing to go find a new voice, a new leader, a new play call, like all of that would just throw an entirely more complex wrench into an offseason that I know we say it every year, big offseason, important offseason, a lot of decisions, but this one is obviously that. So I just wanted to answer that question in the sense that, like, the idea of thinking about that and going there kind of breaks my brain. So, but it's something that will be worth monitoring for sure, without question. So thank you guys for the questions. Thanks for being here on episode 134 of the Alec Lewis Show. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. It's sponsored by Unreal, that has the limited edition hoodies. The most recent one was the winter whiteout hoodie, which is exceptional. You can find that stuff in the link below. And then check out The Athletic, where we've got stories day to day, much more to come as this season moves to a close with 4 games left. It'll be interesting. We'll have another show later this week. But until then, enjoy navigating the snow, and we will talk to you very, very soon.